This is wild. If you ever find yourself called to serve on jury duty, please do not do what this woman did. 26-year-old Kayla DePena was recently sentenced to 179 days jail time and a $500 fine for misconduct during the sentencing of a criminal defendant who was previously found guilty of murder and was facing the death penalty. We talk a lot about jury trials on this channel, and sometimes the question of potential jury misconduct does come up. And this is really because the judicial system really does place a lot of trust on the ability of juries to come to decisions that are just and proper. And sometimes the jury comes to a conclusion that is totally unexpected, even totally unwanted. That's really just the nature of the beast of having a group of randomized individuals come together to come to a decision on something. But even in cases where potential juror misconduct does arise, the idea that a juror can be sent to prison for doing what they did as a juror is a terrifying idea. We do not want to be jailing jurors for any old thing like coming to the wrong conclusion or even making a simple mistake about something, because that inevitably will result in the crumbling of our entire judicial system. So if a juror is going to go to jail, it had better be because they did something very serious. And that's what happened here. Let me back up for a second to give a little bit more context. As I mentioned, DePena was a juror for the sentencing of a criminal defendant. That was Bessman Okafor, who had already been convicted of murdering 19-year-old Alex Zaldivar. In fact, he was convicted back in 2015 for the 2012 killing. So if you think about it, the family of the victim has been living this for 12 years now. Okafor had originally been sentenced to death, but that sentencing went up to the Florida Supreme Court and eventually came back down for new sentencing. This second sentencing was happening this past November 2023 when DePena, the juror in question, was sitting on the jury panel. The two sides had put on their evidence. The judge was about to sequester the jury for the night so that they could go into deliberations. At this time, DePena asked to speak to the judge. When she did, she told the judge that she had spoken with a friend about the case. And she said that as a result of this conversation, her friend gave her information about the case that she said would affect her ability to be fair and impartial when it came to potentially giving the defendant the death sentence. Now, under any other circumstance, if a juror comes to a judge, hat in hand, and says, "Your Honor, I'm sorry, I messed up. I know I wasn't supposed to talk about this case. You told us not to talk about the case with anyone. I couldn't help myself. I talked with a friend. As a result of that conversation, I'm between a rock and a hard place now. I don't think that I can go forward with this knowing what I know, which has not been presented in court." In a case like that, generally speaking, no juror should ever have to worry about any jail time. They messed up. It was unintentional. They're coming hand in hand. And yeah, it sucks when you're in a position that you can't be replaced by an alternate juror because then it results in a mistrial. And this is a huge problem for everyone else involved in this whole process. But at least you've been honest about it. No juror should have to face jail time for that. Maybe a stern lecture by the judge about how you messed up and the consequences that everyone else is going to have to deal with as a result of that, but no jail time. But apparently that is not where the story ends here. See, apparently at her own hearing this month, DePena, the juror, she revealed that she had actually never spoken about the trial with anyone at all. When she asked to talk to the judge just before sequestration, she actually hadn't at that point broken any of the rules placed on her as juror. Rather, she made up that story so that she could get out of further jury duty. I will say that this is a pretty rare thing to happen. Most people, understandably, don't want to serve on jury duty. It's often disruptive to people's lives and to people's work, and some people just absolutely can't stand the idea of not being able to talk about the case. But usually, once paneled on a jury, people take their role very, very seriously. And that's because there is a lot on the line. Most people can understand that. In a civil case, there's usually a lot of money and life and emotion that has gone into getting that case to trial. And there could be huge consequences that in fact shape the lives, the families, the businesses involved in these lawsuits, and more. And then in criminal cases, we have victims and families of victims and defendants, of course, all of whom have a lot on the line. Regardless of the kind of trial, everyone wants to be able to succeed, and at the very least, to be able to move on past trial. And so when a juror decides to lie to get out of further jury duty service, especially when it's like at the end of the trial, it's a selfish act that completely disregards all of the needs and interests of everyone else in that courtroom, to include the other jurors, by the way. And speaking of the other jurors, in this case, some of them testified against DePena, saying that she complained about needing to be at work and even said that she was going to deliberately cause a mistrial shortly before talking to the judge before sequestration.
She did not want to be on this in particular jury. She did mention that her work does not provide compensation for jury duty.
She was upset. She said that she needed to be at work that night. We were called back in the room, and the judge told us we were going to be sequestered for the night, explained the rules, and then we went back into the deliberation room, and she asked to speak to the judge. And before she walked out, she said she was about to make that a mistrial.
So in the end, she was sentenced to serve 179 days and to pay a $500 fine. These are both the maximum punishments that were available for this kind of juror misconduct. So the judge was definitely making a point here. I will say 179 days is a long time, whereas a much shorter duration still would have gotten the message across very clearly. So it has me wondering if there was maybe even more that came out at this hearing that simply hasn't been reported that showed just sheer recklessness and carelessness and selfishness in doing what she did. And I will say, on the one hand, I completely understand that serving on a jury is not always easy for everyone. There are all kinds of ways that jury service can create hardships for people, very real world hardships. Maybe it's the case like here, where someone's work doesn't compensate them for the time spent on jury duty. Technically, employers usually aren't legally required to do so. Or maybe someone has to care for someone at home, like a loved one who's sick. Or maybe for some other reason, they can't find childcare for their young children while they serve, for example. So what is a juror or a prospective juror to do in this kind of situation? This is where they're asked to serve on a jury, but there are very real hardships that come up, either that they know about ahead of time or that come up in the middle of trial. Well, there are two things that a juror or a prospective juror can do. Number one is to speak up at jury selection. It can be intimidating to do so, but believe me, you will be so happy that you did. If you have certain hardships, tell the judge before you're selected to serve on the jury panel. Explain the whole situation. No one is going to mock you. No one is going to shame you. The judge probably will ask if there's a way for you to arrange things in a way so that you can still serve because, let's face it, it is a civic duty. But if you express that you realistically don't have the means to do so, you will very likely be let off of jury duty. This is why, for example, entrepreneurs are very often let out of jury duty, especially if they are like solopreneurs, where they are very, very much needed to make sure that the wheels are still on the train and moving forward. And if they're not there, then everything kind of falls apart. And the reason why a juror is likely to be let go in a situation like this is because no one, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the defense attorney, no one wants to have a person on a jury panel who is sitting there languishing because they're a juror. I mean, think about it. Someone who is constantly feeling daily pressure for the fact that they are sitting there on the jury panel and not at work or not at home taking care of a family member or not watching their kids because their kids are very, very young. Any kind of these reasons that are very real world problems, someone in that kind of a position is very likely to get to deliberations and want to just come to a quick decision, regardless of whether it's the right decision. They might not be willing to sit there and deliberate and go through the evidence piece by piece with the other jurors to make sure that they are coming to the right conclusion. So none of these authority figures in that courtroom want a juror who is itching to get out of there. As annoying as that sometimes can be to see someone not serve because sometimes you kind of think that maybe they're not being sincere about their excuses. But even in cases where the prospective juror or the juror seems like maybe they're not being totally sincere about what they're saying about their hardships, even in those cases, they're likely to be let go just in the off chance that they actually are speaking the truth. And realistically, where it is definitely legitimate, a judge is likely to see your sincerity. Now then, what if someone expresses all of this at jury selection and they still get selected to be on the jury and they're just feeling this building anxiety every day because of these real world hardships? Or what if something comes up in the middle of trial that you didn't even anticipate happening and all of a sudden it's a huge problem? What can you do? Well, you ask to speak to the judge and you tell them about the problems that you're facing, the real actual problems that you're facing. Maybe it's the kind of thing where the judge can just put the trial on hold for a day or two so that you can fix whatever issue has come up. Or maybe the judge will talk with you about whether you can hold on for just a little bit longer until the end of trial. Or maybe the judge will say, okay, thank you for letting me know. We don't want you to be dealing with this huge problem while serving on a jury, so you can be excused from further service on this jury. None of that should get you reprimanded by a judge, let alone anywhere near jail time. As in other areas of life, honesty is the best policy here. And I will say, I do empathize for this juror. She does sound like she had some real hardships that she was facing by virtue of her jury duty service, and that's really sad to hear.
There was no intention of causing any harm, and there was no ill will from my end. I was truly overwhelmed and did not know how to handle this situation.
But the way she went about it was most definitely not the correct way, and it caused a lot of harm to a lot of people. This meant wasting the time of everyone involved in that sentencing. And it meant preventing the victim's family from being able to get a final resolution in the victim's case and being able to move on with their lives after like 12 years of dealing with this. And it completely disregarded the rights of the defendant to a proper jury trial to determine whether he's going to die at the hands of the state or live the rest of maybe a long life in prison. This is a situation that demands responsibility from everyone involved, and this juror definitely violated that. And for that, I think it's justified for her to get jail time. Now, whether 179 days is justified is another question. I'm not sure I have enough information to really opine on that part, but it definitely does speak to the seriousness of this misconduct. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Do you think that this was justified, or did the judge maybe go too far? Do you think that I'm wrong in any part of what I talked about in this video? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more content like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next one.